dying, Father, is nothing left. Ever since I was a child, I had a feeling that something is missing in me. I want to know why I am here. Can any of us know that?
Become yourself. Then God and the devil don't matter.
I want to learn. I want to understand. Be careful. Can you find the force to enable these two quite opposite lives to live together in yourself? At any moment, the wolf can devour the lamb. And you must learn what it means to become responsible. This is an exact science. And that is why you are here.
Out of foreknown history to the unknown future. This is Red Ice Radio. For the Seeker.
And know the point. One must strive to know.
Welcome back. This is Red Ice Radio. My name is Henrik Palmgren. The website is redicecreations.com. Today we're spending an hour with Daniel Estulin, an investigative journalist who has been researching the Bilderbergers for over 14 years. He is the author of The True Story of the Bilderberg Group and the host of a show on Spanish RT called From the Shadows. Daniel joins us to discuss real-life key elements from his latest novel, The Octopus Deception. We'll discuss the planned destruction of the economy in order to maintain the system of control by international bankers as a new form of empire. And later we discuss Daniel's book Deconstructing WikiLeaks. He gives us his take on Julian Assange, the Occupy movement, and Anonymous. And then towards the end we talk about the Bilderberg meeting this year and the recent sad news of the death of Jim Tucker, the trailblazing journalist who since 1975 has focused on the Bilderberg Group. I think many of our listeners will be familiar with you and your work already, especially on the Bilderberg Group, of course. But if they're not, they should be. So this will be a good opportunity to introduce them to your work. So welcome, Daniel. I hope everything is good with you in Spain today.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's great to be with you. Yes, it is.
Excellent. Now, we only have 1 hour with you today, so we'll try to squeeze in as much as we can here. There's a lot to discuss as usual, but especially considering how much work you have behind you. But why don't we begin to talk about your latest book first, The Octopus Deception. We've had a few authors with us before, who mainly pen nonfiction, but then kind of go over to the other side and write a novel. And I'd like to ask why, of course, but there's, especially when there's so much going on in the real world, especially that things are way beyond fiction already. But this is different, though. Your book is different because you're starting out with a very, very important real story, which is about Danny Casolaro. It's a real murder, and this, of course, is a play on The Octopus, his work that later was finished by Jim Keith and Ken Thomas. So tell us a little bit how this story was important to you when you wanted to write this novel, Daniel.
Well, I've always wanted to write a novel. I mean, my favorite author is Vladimir Nabokov. I'm Russian. Nabokov is Russian. I love Russian literature, and I've always felt that I could do a good job writing a novel, and especially since I've been told over and over again that, no, I'm a nonfiction writer, so just stick to being a nonfiction writer. And I thought to myself, hell no, I'm just going to do what I want to do. So I thought, I got to think of some way to get my fiction novel out there. So actually, when you read The Octopus Deception, the most of what you read it exists, and it is absolutely real in this parallel universe of smoke and mirrors. The world of Octopus Deception, unknown to most people, is a place where governments, intelligence agencies, secret societies battle for control of the world. And as you said, Danny Casolaro is real, Promise is real, Golden Lily is real. Most of the things and the elements of the novel, I'd say about 90%, are real, such as for example, a lot of the characters that form part of the novel, such as Henry Kissinger, Paul Volcker, they're real-life characters. Some of the key scenes take place in a White House Situation Room, which is a 5,000 square foot space used by the government both as a conference room and an intelligence management center in the basement of the West Wing of the White House, run by the National Security Council, as well as the Department of Homeland Security. Another key element of the novel is something I've been investigating on and off for about 15 years. It's CTP, Collateral Trading Program, which is basically a highly secretive banking practices that were used to create, as if by magic, trillions of dollars in unaccountable wealth. That too is real. Now, I've spent about 15 years mapping out the covert connections and associations between the leading players involved in the collateral trading programs. And of course, we're talking about some of the world's leading banks, but also some of the world's oldest European royal families. They're all neck deep in these illegal activities, along with some of the world's leading billionaires. Now, I have in my possession copies of the original CTP certificates that, when you add them together, come to a mind-boggling amount of $223,104,000,008.03. And this is the exact amount of monies which was stolen by this computer genius, which forms the background to the story, again, against this backdrop of the financial meltdown. You have the main characters with Danny Casolaro's sister. In real life, he didn't have a sister, but he does in a novel.
Yeah.
Her boyfriend and this Special Forces Ranger by the name of Curtis Fitzgerald. The three of them try to save the world, while they're being chased and run down by secret societies, governments, the Octopus organization, and so on and so forth. That said, it is still a novel. It is still a work of fiction. And the world of my novel doesn't exist in real life, although it deals with real-life problems and real-life situations. It is the reader, as they would in any other novel, who must keep one thing in mind: the society around the octopus deception, the characters, the scenery, the smells and the tastes. They have been manufactured as deliberately as every character and its every trait. Now, you can also enjoy this book on several different levels, which is, again, you can read it as fun reading, a kind of mix of John le Carré and Robert Ludlum. But there's also a more serious level to the novel. I don't want people to think that all I did is put all these characters and all these, events and investigative journalism aspects of my work, into a novel and, just wrote up these characters and somehow tied them together. No, not at all. Yeah. I'd like to think of myself as a serious writer. So the literal level of the novel is it's a study of a loss in all of its manifestations. Every one of the characters in the novel has lost something or someone important in their lives, from Simone Casolaro, who lost her brother, to Michael, her boyfriend, who has to deal with the loss of Simone. She doesn't die, but she almost does. Curtis, the Ranger, loses most of his friends in the war. Even the planet Earth is about to be lost to the collective insanity of a powerful few, this clique, who wish to control the world in the name of many. And the most striking element about the story is its immense shadowy background of pain and frightening possibility, not its practical advice, but its ghastly secret. So there's a lot in this book, and it's a fairly big book. It's about 300 some odd pages, but a lot goes on, a lot of characters, a lot of real mystery that I talk about a lot in my nonfiction books. I can give a bit of using my literary license, and extend and expand it beyond the information that we know into the world of possibilities, let's say, not probabilities.
Very good. I've been reading some of the book, and I've been enjoying it very much so far. And another aspect to fiction might potentially be that you actually can write about things to a certain extent, maybe that you can't in your nonfiction work. Is that any of this true for this book, Daniel?
It is, absolutely. I mean, there just comes a point where you ask yourself, how much is one's life worth? And there are certain things which I've been, very careful not to spend too much time writing about, such as, for example, promise, which I always thought to be a very, hairy subject and difficult to write about. Also, there's another area, aspect of the story, is the stolen World War II gold, which is Golden Lily. And there's a lot of aspects of that very murky world which I talk about in the novel, and it's very, very true. But I never did talk about it in my nonfiction novels because I didn't have all the elements to tie it together, in case someone wishes to or wish to sue me. I certainly had enough information, but not all that I needed to protect myself. And I use this literary license in my novel to actually talk about it. But again, areas such as the stolen gold, the golden lily, CTP, a promise, all of these elements are very, very important parts of the novel. They're the key parts of the novel, but also the key parts of the world's history over the past 60, 70 years. And one such element, when I, for example, talk about golden lily, I don't know if people, I'm just assuming that people know what it is, but maybe I should just go into a little bit and explain.
Yeah.
That,
why don't we do that, Daniel? Because I wanted to ask you, we've talked about Yamashita's gold before on the program, and that's the same story pretty much, but under a different name. But tell us what you know about it.
Exactly. Yeah, well, this is it. There was a poem written by a Japanese emperor. What happened between 1937 and 1942? A highly secretive unit led by emperor's younger brother was tasked with the methodical plundering of Southeast Asia, of the riches of Southeast Asia. And the operation was called Golden Lily. The sheer quantity and value of plunder gathered by Golden Lily was absolutely mind-boggling. So most of anything that was worth in Southeast Asia between 1937 and 1942 was stolen by the Japanese. Now, just to give you an idea just how much money we're talking about, the amount of gold buried in the Philippines alone during World War II is 10 times greater than the official figures of 140,000 metric tons of gold supposedly mined in human history. And the fact that such quantities of gold exist outside of official channels is absolutely astonishing. That this secret is officially protected is even more shocking. Now, I talk about 37 and 42. Why only for 37 and 42? Because beginning in 1943, most of that gold was shipped to Japanese headquarters in the Philippines. Why 43? Because Stalingrad happened in 43. That was the turning point in World War II in Europe. And again, we talk about it. It's part of one of the background stories or secondary stories in the book, one of the key elements which allow the protagonists to find one of the key individuals, which I call the invisible man, the individual who actually created Promise software. Now, we don't know in the real life, in the real world, who that person really was able to loot, or individuals to loot the monies from Hamilton Securities. But in this story, we certainly do, and this part of Golden Lily episode helps us understand. So what basically happened was, beginning with Stalingrad, both those two German and Japanese commanders understood. The writing was on the wall. The war was over. It was just a matter of time. Now, moving the treasure to Japan was no longer an option. So they changed the plans on temporary basis. So the Japanese army shipped the gold to the islands, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and was forced to leave it there with the vain hope of returning after the war and recovering the loot in secret, or negotiating with the Americans or the winning entities after the war, and being able to keep the Philippines and Malaysia and so on in their possession. That, of course, didn't happen. Now, just to give you an idea, that by the 1943 accounts, the amount of Golden Lily gold was valued at $190 billion.
Oh.
That was at the time when an ounce was $3.50. Now, today, let's say it's $1,500. If you actually calculate the amount of money that gold is worth today, we're talking about quadrillions of dollars of monies.
Yeah.
And, of course, the official history is very, very wrong. Now, another interesting part of the whole Golden Lily story is that some of the gold was shipped also to Indonesia. And what's virtually unknown to contemporary history is the fact that Indonesia's President Sukarno, along with a number of other third world leaders, had planned to set up a secret non-aligned bank back in 1955 using trillions of dollars in contraband gold as a guarantee, which was, of course, the number one subject on the 1955 Bilderberger agenda. What to do about Sukarno and his plan for the non-aligned World Bank, which would dwarf in size and power anything the West could put up, even you could put all the Western banks together, still you wouldn't have enough monies, to compare to what Sukarno had in all of that gold and gems and rubies, which were stashed and hidden by the Japanese in the world, in the war. So the Western powers, they sent high-level delegations to Indonesia to try to convince him, cajole him into cooperating or threatening him, basically, into giving up that gold. He said no. 10 years later, they finally got rid of him. But again, these elements are very key parts of the novel. But again, it's not just nonfiction. It's how I weave the story together, because you don't know who the bad guy is, if you want to call it this way. The main culprit, the puppet master who's pulling all these things, all the strings behind the scene and making all these events happen. You don't find out until the second last page. And most people who have read the book, because Octopus Deception came out in Spain in 2011, and it was the #1 selling title for over 23 weeks in a row in Spain as a fiction title. People were saying, we didn't know until the second last page who the bad guy was. So anyway, that's a bit of a background.
Yeah, really good. Interesting. Now, for a moment here, if we go back to the gold here, because it's an intensely interesting story. We've been following it. We had Sterling Seagrave with us, who've written extensively about this as well in the past. But there is speculation, obviously, that all of the gold hasn't been located or found, or, some of it ended up in America to kind of fund the whole, black market, if you will, of illicit, drug trades and, arms and everything else, that this is kind of what's fueling the quote unquote black economy. How much of that is true, do you think?
I think most of it, if not all of it, is true. I think very much so. Again, there's a lot of layers to the story. In late May 1942, the American government had cracked Japanese secret communication codes and had prepared its own plans to get its hands on the gold. Now, I don't know if you remember Roosevelt's famous speech about unconditional surrender for the Axis, for the Axis powers. Casablanca Conference, January 1943. Mm-hmm. Now, if you actually realize, you put these two things in perspective, he wasn't particularly concerned, about the Axis powers' crimes. What he was talking about, unconditional surrender, is actually getting his hands on all this booty without Japanese and the Germans having anything to do with it. So Roosevelt, the great humanitarian, didn't have the victims on his mind when he surprised Churchill with his words. So the government absolutely knew, the American government knew. Now, the American broke the codes, and they kept the information very close to their vests. American intelligence agents carried out a clandestine recovery operation in the Philippines between 48 and 56. They found some of the maps from the captured Japanese prisoners, and it had taken the CIA tracking team 4 months to find just to get to the first treasure cave, located more than 70 meters below the ground, because you see the Japanese engineers had developed very sophisticated techniques using unusual rock formations, for example, and other topographic signs as signals to reveal their locations. Of course, they're all booby-trapped, so it took them a while to get to the first site. And they were over, trying to remember, 172 different sites, and most of them, I'd say, probably half have been recovered, half have not. The ones that have been recovered remain where they are, because there's no reason to take them out. Yeah. They know where they are, nobody can get to them, and they're being intensely watched. Now, what did happen, and this is another part of the story of my book, is the role that Ferdinand Marcos, the president of the Philippines, played in this whole in the whole story. Now, I have through a friend of mine a copy of one of the gold bullion certificates with Marcos's name on it. Now, this goes back, the Marcos story and the gold goes back to the early 1950s. In 1953, he was just a lowly hoodlum and a hustler. He had limitless ambition, and he was also working for the American government as a translator, interpreting from the Japanese prisoners into English. Between 1953 and 1970, with the help of Japanese prisoners of war captured in the Philippines, Marcos unearthed slightly over 600 metric tons of gold. Okay, and then he was able to get his hands on maps, some parts of these, secret Japanese maps that showed the location of the golds, and then he and his team, they went to work. And between early 70s and just a few weeks before he was deposed, they've uncovered a total of 63,321 metric tons of gold. Then the Trilateral Commission found out, and they sent him a 13-page letter, and again, I have a copy of that letter, and that letter, the last page of the letter states, return 63,321 metric tons of gold, and you and only you shall become the greatest man in the history of Asia. Marcos didn't particularly like the idea, so he said no. 3 days later, if you believe in conspiracy or coincidence theories, he was deposed in what was, sold to us as popular uprising. This is a very, again, interesting part of the Golden Lily story.
Oh, indeed. How much do you think of the activity that's been going on around Asia and around that region? I mean, the Vietnam War, the Korea War, and everything has, to a certain extent, to do with the relocation of this gold, or trying to detopple the people who have gotten any kind of access to it?
I don't think so, because at the time, between 1948 and mid-1950s, Americans were looking for it. So you had, the Korean War ended in '53, and then we had Vietnam a few years later, which really was a war between secret societies for the control of the drug trade. The French lost, the Americans won, and the drugs, they started washing them through Wall Street, which is what that was. And of course, gold, drugs, and gun running and money laundering, they're all part and parcel of the same techniques, equation run by the same people. That's obvious. But that gold, most of it is controlled by this organization called Black Eagle Trust, and which is basically a consortium of 700 top banks in the world. So these banks controlling the world economy and controlling the governments wouldn't allow governments, access to this gold unless they wanted that access. And they simply had no need to take it out of the ground, find it, and bring it back, because, they needed to keep it, in a safe location. And that was as safe as it could get.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a absolutely fascinating story. And if we talk about an organization that is as close to the octopus as possible, I guess this would be it. Do you, Daniel, at this point, know who actually is part of it, or are these unknown people to a certain extent today of the octopus?
I think, for example, Citibank is a very big part of this organization. And again, in my book, one of the key characters, and I kill him in my book, John Reed, former CEO of Citibank. Yeah. A real life character. He's a real character. He's not someone I made up. He exists. He was, the CEO of Citibank. And I just, didn't like him, so I killed him in the novel. And because a lot of that gold, and a lot of the money from that gold was actually hidden in over 30 accounts in a block at Citibank. So the novel begins with Danny Casolaro dying, his suitcase going missing, and then $223 billion being stolen by someone from this account. And these accounts were controlled by John Reed, and John Reed was part of Octopus. And so he was the keeper of the crypt. And so when the money was stolen, he was called by the Octopus organization to explain what happened. And so this frantic search, Octopus is looking for the money to control the world, basically the world economy. The government, the United States government, is looking for that money because that money is actually going to pay the outstanding obligations of the government. You have secret societies. You have another organization, I'm not going to reveal who they are, is also looking for this gold. And of course, you have the three main characters are looking for the gold because they need to find it to save the world from collapse.
Yeah. If we talk about the real world a little bit here, where do you think that all of this money also is going? I mean, this is more money than people who would individually would be part of this, that they could spend and use in 10 lifetimes of their own. And there's a lot of theaters, of course, where the money is going. But in your view, where's it being spent? Is it black ops? Is it secret technology? Is it just to subjugate and control the world militarily? What do you think?
I don't know if you've heard of this term called plunge protection team.
No.
Now, what happened, again, it's all related to CTP. Now, these collateral trading programs, which is basically a highly speculative of the books, government-run operations. Every agency in America is in on it. CIA, FBI, anything, and everyone is in on every soup. Alphabet soup agency is on the action.
Yeah.
You're talking, generating spectacular profits for very little risk. Now, the trillions of dollars, created and held in dormant accounts, which were stolen in the book and in real life also, in this particular case through promise, they were part of the collateral trading program, which was a government operation created to save the world's financial system from imploding in case of financial Armageddon. So if you remember back in 2010, do you remember when the markets, dropped like 10% in about 8 minutes?
Yeah.
And then, they righted themselves by the end of the day. Well, somebody was pouring trillions of dollars, not millions or billions, trillions of dollars into the system. Because that's the only way you can actually correct something like this. Because we were looking at, the financial tsunami, which were ready to literally, just swipe away the entire world's financial economy in one day. And that's what happened. So you had this plunge protection team using this collateral trading programs, to right the ship. Banks and central banks that operate CTP run two sets of books. One for public scrutiny and another set for private viewing only. It's so in real life and it's so in my novel.
Yeah.
And these are the operations. So all of this money is going into these types of financial operations.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more about, not only, of course, where the money is being, spent and everything else, but also just one of the main motives or reasons behind the crash of the market. I've always seen this as more consolidation of the power and the control of the financial market into fewer hands. We've seen an eradication of certain banks along the way here, but certain ones have been bailed out by government, ultimately taxpayers and everything else. But where do you see that they want to take this? Do they ultimately want to destroy the financial system altogether and create something new, or where do you think it's going? What's the incentive here?
Absolutely, you just said it. I want everyone to understand that what we're witnessing is in the world today. The wholesale destruction of the world's economy is not an accident, okay? Nor is it a miscalculation result of political shenanigans. This is being done on purpose, absolutely on purpose. And the reason why is that the empire knows that the progress of humanity means that the end of empire is imminent, that it cannot survive in a world where there's widespread technological and scientific progress. It requires a world in which people are dumb and servile like sheep. And so the empire then sets out to destroy those very structures like nation states which support life, which support the progress of humanity. They're deliberately destroying countries, independent nations, that is, targeting the economies of nations to destroy them as a way of maintaining their own power. And this is all being done by design. Now, the empire is not a king or a queen sitting on a gold-plated throne. Empires are buff kings. It's a system of control. It is control of everything by an international monetary system controlled by international bankers. Globalization, you see, is nothing but a new form of empire. It's the elimination of the nation state, elimination of liberty, and elimination of rights. Okay, and that's what basically is going on. Now, people think, erroneously, that economy is money. Money has nothing to do with the economy. Money has no intrinsic value. Okay, what the elite want is an empire. Okay, and people think that to have an empire, you need money. But you don't need money. Money is an instrument.
Yeah.
Money doesn't affect the development of the planet. There's this delusionary belief that some intrinsic physical value is expressed by money, which is false. Value is expressed not as a quantity per se, but only as the relative effects of the increase or the decrease of the physical potential relative population density of the individual in society. In other words, if there's wealth in society, progress and development is directly proportional to population density. So if we have wealth, we have more people on the planet. We have more technology, we have more wealth. We have more people, we have more money, and so on and so forth. So if you're Rockefeller, which is just a metaphor for powerful people, because he's really nobody important. And again, this may surprise a lot of people. The reason I say this is if you put his name in Google search engine, you're going to get like 3 zillion pages. And that should tell any thinking person that Rockefeller is nothing. Because really powerful people If you type their name into Google, don't appear anywhere.
Well, we don't even have their names.
Powerful.
We don't even have their names, I'd say. But
And even if we did, like the Frisco Baldis, for example, one of the oldest, most powerful Venetian black nobility families. You don't see anything or hear anything about them because they're powerful. Only lackeys like Rockefeller have their names in there. But again, we're talking about powerful like the Rockefellers of the world, the Rothschilds of the world, etc. For them to live, we have to die. There's just simply not enough food and water, according to them, to all of us. And this is exactly why you're seeing the world's economy being destroyed on purpose. And again, going back to my novel for a second, the backdrop to the novel is the financial destruction of the world's economy.
Yeah.
Everything is being destroyed on purpose. And people, the main characters, are trying to save the world from destruction while all this other stuff goes on around them.
And the empire will use any means necessary to destroy this, quote-unquote progress. We're talking about development, or if a nation, peacefully managed to develop under a certain age, and they'll use terrorism, war. They'll put political puppets in place to destabilize the nation. They'll use any means they can, basically, to cause chaos. That's how I've seen it, anyway. The method played.
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, it has to be this way. I mean, that's the only way it can be. Actually, if you look at some of the stuff that's going on here, talking about the economic order, all right? It's not a monolith. No single group of rich folks sit around, together in a dark room, debating planetary future, holding hands, staring at a crystal ball. We're looking at, right now, this realignment. Enormous streams of wealth are being expanded and, more importantly, transferred behind the scenes. And the people who control this money, as you said, doing many different ways, but they're certainly not giving up their power. Money makes its own rules, and we're seeing right now. And one of the things that we have seen in the past 6 months, for example, is the bubbling of virtually every sector of the economy. One bubble after another.
Yep.
Speculation is rampant, and with it, fortunes are being made and lost in a blink of an eye. Now, one of the things that is happening is what's called the strong dollar policy, which is also financial terrorism, if you really think about it. And as a part of that, the bubbling and housing and the government debt, including the tremendous fraud. And the reality is, if you're going to have a highly fraudulent mortgage bubble, you need to get the honest people out of the way. And sometimes false scandals are used to do that. And of course, again, there we go again, what you're saying before. You can have terrorists, you can have financial terrorists, or you can have the financial jackals, as John Perkins talked about in his book.
Yeah,
it's the same operation run by the same people. And again, the housing bubble in the States was predicated on massive amounts of federal mortgage insurance and bank deposit credits in other forms of federal credit, including the government-sponsored enterprises. You see, you couldn't have a fraudulent housing bubble if people could see this data, in front of them. So they hid this information. And that's where the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development comes in, and all these characters who operate illegally behind the scenes, who actually work for HUD, and so on and so forth.
Well, they create distrust, so people, in different ways take out their money. They don't longer invest. It's very easy, even just with the aid of media, really. You can pump a little money into a certain sector of the economy, but then you can also spread the rumors that something is going to happen, and that will be actual. Then it will begin to happen. So it's very simple. It's incredibly simple, actually.
Yep, absolutely.
Now, how much infighting is there behind the scenes, do you think? Different groups fighting with each other about, territory, money, and everything else. Different individuals that are very powerful, have a lot of money and access. Is there, because as you said earlier, there might not be this kind of everyone holding hands and agreeing on where to go, if you will. So what do you think?
Well, I think there's a lot of people making a lot of a big deal about this alleged infighting. I mean, I don't know if they're fighting each other. I've never been invited to one of these meetings, but you could just see from what's out there. If you look at the at the noises the media is making and how they work together against each other. I mean, they have a common enemy. That's us, the people.
Yeah.
Bin Laden was never an enemy. Mullah Omar was never an enemy. We, the people, are the enemy. So all of these characters, they will always unite against us. So just think of a family. I mean, you're going to have infighting, you have cousins who may not like each other all that much. But in the end, when an outsider comes in, the family unites and fights against the outsider. And in this case, we're not the outsiders. Well, we are the outsiders. We're just in their way. There's just too many of us. So no matter how much infighting they do, no matter who controls what media group, who buys, up whom, and who invests more money into where, in the end, all these people are still working together against us. At least that's how I see it.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to ask you about WikiLeaks a little bit later, but one more thing on this. With this into consideration, what you're talking about, basically, have a chaotic environment. We hear a lot of talk about, obviously, a one world government, a one world currency to a certain degree to kind of, I guess, try to stabilize things. This would be the reason they would give us, anyway, in terms of a problem reaction solution, that it would be a chaotic world, and they offer to come in with some kind of stabilizing factor, which would be a one world government, a one world currency, etc. But that would also mean, to a certain extent, order and strict fascist order, of course, but nonetheless, this chaos might be subside at that point. So how real is that, do you think, at this stage anyway? Because if they want to keep things in chaotic and in motion, they should keep it just the way it is now, right?
Well, one of the things that they've done is they have created a new investment model, which is called the central banking warfare model. And because, again, it all passes through money. Money is the key element. Understand how money works. As Catherine Austin Fitts always says, you'll understand how everything else works. The central banks print money, and the military makes sure that people take it and exchange it for cheap natural resources. And that's been going on for about 500 years. Now, it didn't start with Goldman Sachs. It didn't start with Hong Shang. If you look at who engineered the strong dollar policy, who engineered the bubbling of the mortgage market, and who engineered the suppression of the gold price, you look at pretty much, at the brains of the operation behind is probably the Goldman Sachs. So you can go to them, and from them you can actually build all these other links. Now, the reality is that, you have a government in the United States which is highly dependent on the New York Federal Reserve member banks to finance its operations. And everyone in America is highly dependent on the checks coming out of those cash flows. So you have the entire country that is highly dependent on the bond market, and a few firms organizing and engineering it, from where you get a lot of this power. So no matter how you look at it, you still have the entire system highly dependent on the central banking warfare model, and they will have to behave in the same way as if they're going to keep the game going. Of course, the game is up, and we're seeing it happen right now. But they're making the impression, or giving the impression, that the game is still going. Okay? So you've got at this point an upside-down pyramid of bonds and derivatives, and the whole operation is very leveraged financially and can tolerate very little risk. So no matter how you look at it, it still goes through that. Money, strong, warfare banking, strong dollar policy and central banking warfare model, these are the operations that these people are going to try to protect any way they can. And anybody who gets in the way, they'll be certainly killed, eliminated, in the cruelest way possible, because this is the only way that these characters can keep the game going, or using another metaphor, the ball in play.
Indeed. Now, you released a book in 2012, last year, Deconstructing WikiLeaks. I wanted to ask you some more about this. We've had a lot of information coming out from this organization, hacking, conglomerate, whatever you want to call it. And of course, Julian Assange has been portrayed as a hero in all of this, one who's fighting against many of the things that you're talking about, the empire, corruption, and such. But what's your take on this story, Daniel, and how do you see him fitting into this picture? And he's releasing a lot of information that people never ever heard about before, and they think just because it's an inside story, just because it's a leaked document, it has to be the truth, right?
Well, again, there's a lot of stuff there that we can talk about. And my book, again, it was released first in Spain when most people didn't know who Assange was, and then was released by Chris Milligan of Trying Day Press in the United States. It's a very interesting story because, I have a television show in RT, Russia Today, and Assange was also, had his RT. So, a lot of people say, well, well, how can you, if you guys work at the same station and you're not friends, you actually, poo-pooing. We're not friends. We've never been friends. I have nothing to do with Assange. I have my own house and my own bed, and he sleeps, in somebody else's bed in Equatorial Embassy in London. We are not alike at all. Now, there's little reliable data on Assange, which is, again, it walks, talks, smells like and quacks like a duck, or CIA in this particular case. Now, I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that he's CIA, but what we do know, from what little we know, is that Assange, back in the 80s, he was associated with Chaos Computer Club in Hamburg, Germany. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, the leader of the group, Karl Koch, was a legendary hacker who invented a famous Trojan virus, which everyone, of course, knows, that destroyed many of the U.S. government's military computers. Now, at the time, Koch was already in the crosshairs of the German intelligence because he was trying to sell the operating system source codes to the Soviet KGB. Okay? Now, the whole thing is that he had a cocaine problem, Karl Koch. And so, basically, during a 3-year period, Soviet KGB, in return of anywhere between $50,000 and $100,000 plus drugs, the Soviets received 5 discs with secret information between May and December '86, when the Soviet Union was still a nation, at an undisclosed location in East Berlin. Now, these discs contained thousands of passwords and computer codes, access mechanisms, and programs that allowed the Soviet Union access to computer centers in the Western world. Okay? And Koch and Assange, they form part of the same operation. So that's a very interesting point about Assange. Another interesting thing to keep in mind is, again, if we go back to the money, and we start following the money. Assange was looking for or soliciting funds from 2 organizations. One was Freedom House, and the other one was NED, which is National Endowment for Democracy. Now, what is Freedom House? It's a Washington-based organization which was founded, at the beginning of the Second World War by Leo Cherny to promote American entry into the Second World War. And during the Cold War, Freedom House was used as a vehicle for the CIA-directed anti-communist propaganda. So that's very interesting. So we have Assange, a freedom fighter, who's allegedly getting all this information out, soliciting monies from an organization connected and or affiliated, to government-led operations against communists. Now, the other one is National Endowment for Democracy, and WikiLeaks also were soliciting funds from them. Now, National Endowment for Democracy was created by the American government, which was a top-secret project with objectives, which was a very clear-cut objective, to undermine any and all governments around the world whose interests do not coincide with the publicly stated long-range interests of the American government. So you have, very interesting, you have these 2 organizations which were allegedly being helped by, or helping Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. Now, if you look also at some of the characters who form part of the board of directors, just, from what WikiLeaks said, they're talking about mathematicians, startup technology companies from Taiwan, Europe, Australia, South Africa, representatives, from Russian and Tibetan refugee communities, reporters, a former U.S. intelligence analyst, and a cryptographer. Now, is it me or is something obviously very fishy about this mix? So who are some of these, key characters? One of the key characters on the board of directors was a guy by the name of Philip Adams. And this individual held key positions in Australian governmental media administrations and wrote articles for the Financial Times and the New York Times. And also, these are the characters who gave Julian Assange an award in 2008 on Censorship Freedom of Expression Award. Now, is that a coincidence? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Another individual is a guy by the name of Ben Lowry, who was a former security boss of Google. Now, Google, and as people think it's some whooshy nice little company, it's an enormous corporation who works hand in glove with the American government, and you can call it, that's actually more powerful than most governments on the planet.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of these, very funny characters working together, whose objective is, who God knows what. But as far as I'm concerned, the two real objectives, as far as WikiLeaks is concerned, as an operation, one is to shut down Internet, and the other is to change the paradigm of modern society. Now, let me explain what I mean. I said this when I wrote this, before all this noise about the government efforts, American government efforts to shut down Internet, when the book was first released in Spain 3 years ago. Now, what is emerging from all the, noise and WikiLeaks fury in Washington is that the entire scandal is serving to advance a long-standing Barack Obama and George Bush agenda of policing the until now free Internet. Already you have the United States government, shut down the WikiLeaks server in the United States, although no identifiable, U.S. law has ever been broken. And they're doing it now all over the world. So again, the objective is to control Internet. And the other point, as I said before, is to change the paradigm of society. We're talking about their objectives. A lot of people ask if WikiLeaks is a CIA front. I don't know. What do you think?
What's the deal with his lawyer, Mark Stevens? He had some interesting connection to the Waddesdon Trust, Rothschild own. There's a connection to the Waddesdon Trust, basically to them. And
yeah, exactly. Exactly. And these people are behind magazines such as The Economist in England.
Yeah,
and of course
he got a whole, basically, he's been getting immense media attention around the world, and The Economist gave him this award, and basically like a full coverage of every release is going to, happen through them. This doesn't just accidentally happen, it doesn't just get picked up by.
It doesn't accidentally happen, exactly. And Assange, way back when, he said that, when someone asked him if you were a U.S. government CIA front, and he said, no, WikiLeaks is not a CIA front, or any other agency front for that matter. Quite the opposite. He said, by definition, spy agencies want to hide information, and they meaning WikiLeaks, want to get it out to the public. That's true. But by definition, a covert operation always pretends to be something it is not, and never claims to be what it is. In other words, it can be identified as an official CIA project. So it must seem to be the opposite of what it is. And for any false flag operation to be effective, 90% at least of what you put out has to be legitimate information. Only then will you be able to target the people with disinformation for completely different reasons.
So do you think that they've chosen the things that the WikiLeaks wanted to release? Say, okay, this is damaging enough, but it doesn't reveal the whole picture, so let's go with it. It's the truth, but it's just level 1 of 100 levels pretty much, and this will make people believe it pretty much, and with that they'll also swallow what the incentive is for this, of where we want to take things with this information.
I certainly think so. They've certainly put out a lot of information. Now, as far as I'm concerned, WikiLeaks has the essential features of a process of manufactured dissent. It seeks allegedly to expose government lies. It has released important information on U.S. war crimes. But once the project becomes embedded in the mold of mainstream journalism, it is then used as an instrument of media disinformation, because it is in the interest of the corporate elites to accept dissent and protest as a feature of the system, in as much as they do not threaten the established social order, as we saw with the Occupy Wall Street movement, which was financed by whom? By the same financial elites, Wall Street corporations who supposedly, were being targeted by them. Yeah. So the purpose is not to repress dissent, but on the contrary, to shape and mold the protest movement to set the outer limits of dissent. To maintain their legitimacy, the economic elites favor limited and controlled forms of opposition because they need that. Yeah. And to be effective, the process of manufacturing dissent must be carefully regulated and monitored by those who are the object of the protest movement. And again, we saw that in Occupy Wall Street. We saw it over and over and time again, with WikiLeaks. And that's how the operations work, which is why, as far as I'm concerned, Assange is not I would actually even go even further. I'd say that I probably don't think that Assange he realized, to a large extent that he was, being manhandled and controlled from a distance by these, organizations such as the CIA. But the operations themselves and the people who were on the board, they were certainly a part of the operation. And as I said, I think certainly there's just too much information out there, that points to the fact that WikiLeaks was, a CIA front.
Indeed. I mean, a little bit later here, as we're going to begin to wrap up in a few minutes, I want to ask you a little bit more about Bilderberg and next upcoming conference, etc. But just for a little bit more on WikiLeaks here, and also tying this into the whole hacking, business that's been going on lately, we can bring in Anonymous into the picture as well. And with the fruits of everything that has been happening, if you will, of this labor, I see that these organizations are definitely used to create a kind of a havoc, if you will, also on the web, and they've been striking symbolic targets, if you will, as opposed to going after real powerful targets instead. But with the aid of this, this is actually how they will manage to potentially rally a lot of support for the fact that internet, as you said, Daniel, will have to have tighter regulations on the web, because we can't have these organizations run around and creating all this havoc on the web. We need to have it controlled. It needs to be regulated and secure. And as more and more of this goes on, I think maybe that will create the incentive, for people to say, okay, well, we need to have something better in place, right? This is where it's kind of going at.
Well, I definitely think so. For me, they folded Assange, they bundled them up, and folded that operation into the next operation, which is the Anonymous. If you go back to the WikiLeaks stuff, they have a lot of free stuff. Apparently doing a public service for all that information which was coming out. Apparently it was all that information. He was risking his life. With the enterprise, funded by selling, all this stuff as important information. But again, in the world of spies, the free stuff, okay, which is what Assange was putting out, is meant to lure volunteers and promote high-profile public service, as you just said. Lipstick with risk, with the enterprise, funded by selling costly material sold on the black market of worldwide spying, in the tradition of public benefit operations. And that's how the whole thing is done. There's a very large underground economy in stolen information. And some of it comes using the internet. Other information comes from enlisted men in key positions and operations. Still, other information comes directly from governments through agencies set up, for this purpose. And WikiLeaks is a part of that. It is a very small part, but the technology for selling stolen information is very large and very lucrative. Governments do it. Operations, operatives do it. Individuals do it. Julian Assange, I have no doubts at all, did it as well. Anything of value was sold. Everything else was, put out, and everything really, really important was kept back. And so they basically sell stolen information. But in order to sell it to the highest bidder, first, you have to overvalue it in order to get the highest price. It's like, talking about the bubbling of the economy. So WikiLeaks is engaged in a campaign to raise the price of this information. So, again, Anonymous, WikiLeaks, part of the same operation run by the same people.
Very good. Something to keep in mind as a lot of this is unfolding in the mainstream media at this stage. All right, last topic that we'll have time for today, Daniel. Bilderberg. We had Jim Tucker sadly passing away here a few weeks ago.
I just heard about that a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
And my condolences go out to his family. I met Jim for the first time back in 1995. We became friends in 1996 at my second Bilderberg conference in King City, in Toronto, Canada, when we literally, for the first time in history, Bilderberg became a known entity, because at that conference they tried to break Canada up into French and English-speaking Canada, and then merge English-speaking Canada with the United States to create, greater North America. According to them, was to balance the books, because the United States, when Reagan came, and became president of the United States, they called in, the biggest, corporate bosses in America, and basically they told Reagan and Bush that America was broke had it been a corporation and, would put into receivership. So they created this plan, And the plan was to merge the two countries together and get Quebec out of there because it's French-speaking. And the plan was going to take 15 years. So 1981 plus 15, 1996, that's what Canada and the United States were supposed to merge. And Quebec separated through separatist movement in Quebec, which was organized back in 1981. So we blew that open, Jim Tucker and I. And, Jim was a trailblazer. He was unique, and he slowed down considerably over the last few years. But, I loved the man for many, many years until Bilderberg became popular, let's say after my book came out in 2005. And then the year later in Canada, 2006, that was the big year in Ottawa. But, beginning in 2008, 2009, it became hip to attend Bilderberg conferences and protests.
Yeah.
Before that, it wasn't hip. People didn't know anything about it. It was just, kind of a scary thing. And Jim and I, most of these years, from 1995 until 2007, more or less 2008, were the only ones attending these things. Surrounded by, plethora of escorts from the intelligence community who always, followed us anywhere we went. And so, we spent a lot of time together talking, having, exchanging stories. He told me his life story going back to the early days of sports journalism. Anyway, Jim was a great man, great guy, great journalist, hard-nosed, and God bless him. And if he's listening, here's to you, Jim.
Very good, very good. Thank you for that. Now, so with these things in consideration, what you just mentioned, how it's been virtually unknown into being a very, very, quote unquote, popular kind of event in terms of, the secrecy of the world and stuff like that. Does this mean that the meetings have kind of lost their allure a little bit, that actually at this point, the people who were really maybe attending these conferences to pull the strings on the world scene in some way, maybe are attending another meeting that we don't know about today?
Well, they are attending other meetings, more important meetings. That's why, Bilderberg was never really all that important. And it's made, upset a lot of people who think that Bilderberg is the top of, some fancy-looking pyramid, the evil eye, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But they're not. Bilderberg is a conspiracy reality. And there are many people, as I said, who go off the deep end and try to make a lot more of the Bilderberg group than it actually was or is, which is kind of absurd. It was a very important element of the oligarchical structures of the Cold War period. And that in and of itself is a pretty significant factor, because what it meant was that Bilderberg was a vehicle through which private, financier, oligarchical interests were able to impose their policies on what is nominally sovereign governments. And that's what Bilderberg was, if you really want to look at it. Now, Bilderberg, Trilateral Commission, Council of Foreign Relations, these are organizations that have operational missions. These are not the seats of power. They're not the organizations that actually meet and deliberate on major policy decisions, issues of war and peace, questions of genocide. You can call them the conveyor belts. That's why it's a mistake to think that somehow or other you can pinpoint the Bilderbergers, the Circle, CFR, Trilateral Commission, as the hub of oligarchical power. When you have organizations that have meeting dates, rosters of members, and now, even web pages and Twitters and Facebook, hell, I don't know, call me a moron, but, when I add 2 plus 2, I get a 4.
Yeah.
The oligarchical principle, works on a different and higher level. And so what they do is they create a multiplicity of front organizations whose job is to radiate out the idea that already has been predetermined at a much higher and much more exclusive levels. These organizations like Bilderberg, they play an important role. But again, they're not the top of the pyramid. And also, if you look at the characters who attend the Bilderberg conferences today, they have very little to do with the initial, the individuals, the real, power movers and financial and political titans who attended Bilderberg's conferences back in the 1950s and 1960s. You look at some of these, degenerate European commissioners who attend Bilderberg conferences. I wouldn't have them clean my toilet.
Yeah, that's right.
Let alone attend a Bilderberg conference, which is why, again, Bilderberg has lost a lot of its luster. It's still important, but now I think it's more than anything fashion. I'm just waiting for someone to come out with a Bilderberg T-shirt, and then we will have arrived.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. two big points here. One, of course, this year is going to take place at the Grove Luxury Hotel, Waterford, in the United Kingdom. Anything to add? Are you going to attend or anything like that?
No, I'm not going to attend, simply because we just got to the point where to get information from our sources, I don't need to attend. I used to go because, Jim and I were the only ones there, so we need to take the photographs, and now everybody else goes. So you're going to have enough people taking photographs and enough people, posing in front of the, hotel and, saying, death to the Bilderbergers and, down with the New World Order. I don't think they need me there.
Now, the Queen Beatrix stepped down recently. Holland has a new king, as it were, and they've always been very prominent with the Bilderberg meetings. Do you think this new king of the Netherlands is going to be part of the Bilderberg groups and everything else here?
Well, I think they're just keeping up, the old traditions, the old Nazis, back in power. Okay, and of course, if you look at the old Bilderbergers, going back to the Prince Bernhard days, the biggest part of Bilderberg at the time, back in the 1950s, was that it was heavily populated by people who came out of the World War II Nazi apparatus and who were basically cleaned up and dusted off and employed to become a hardcore Cold War anti-Soviet structures in the West. And if you look at the and Prince Bernhard and that whole family, you're talking about hardcore Nazis. And what you have right now, through this marriage, you have the Argentine Nazis marrying the Orange family Nazis, and so you have the drug war or the control of the drug trade in South America. You have the monies, the gold, the money laundering, all controlled through the Nazi apparatus. Just consolidation of the same families who are basically working towards the same end.
Very good. We're going to let you go for this time, Daniel. Before we do, of course, give out your website so people know where to pick up not only the octopus deception that we talked so much in the beginning about, but your other titles as well. Well,
the best places you can actually buy it on my site, DanielEstulin.com. You can also go to Trine Day Press webpage, trineday.com. By them. The book is called The Octopus Deception. It's a novel. It just released in the United States. It was the #1 seller in Spain. It's a huge bestseller. It's actually one of the biggest selling titles in the history of my Spanish publisher. And I think a lot of people will be very, very surprised when they read Octopus Deception.
Daniel Estulin, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your perspective. Have a good one.
Thank you for letting me be on your show. Take care.
And there you have it, my friends. That's our program for today. Thank you for listening. We'll return soon with Danny Vandramini and then Scott Volter. Much more coming up after this. Please see our schedule on redicecreations.com or our members website, redicemembers.com. And do take a look at our members site for full access to our archives. We have much more there for you. All right, have a great rest of your day or evening, and we will talk to you more in just a few days. Bye-bye.